Hi, my name is Jeff Walston, and this is just my testimony. I grew up in Utah, in Moab. My mother's side of the family were generational Mormons. My dad's side of the family joined the Mormon church when he was 8. I grew up in a very good Mormon home, and we were at the Mormon church whenever it was open. We did the Mormon activities, we did all that. I was a priest, a deacon, the whole priesthood thing, went through it. I went on a Mormon mission to England, and that was probably one of my things that got me thinking. Mormon mission was supposed to be the best time of your life because you're serving God full time, and it wasn't. While I was out there, a lot of the companions I had didn't want to be there. And it was just weird to me because I wanted to be there. I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to serve the Lord full time, and it didn't turn out that way. It was just an odd time of my life. When I was on my Mormon mission, they changed the rules that if you had been out less than 6 months, the men's missions were 18 months at that point. So I only served 18 months, served it honorably, returned home, and it was God's provision that I only served 18 months, because the day after I got home, I met my wife the very next day, and we had a whirlwind romance. We got married in the Salt Lake Temple. We did the whole thing. We were good temple Mormons. We went to the temple on a regular basis. And yet it wasn't what it should be in our minds. There were other issues that popped up that her parents had started doing research on Mormon history. And so I have always been of the opinion that I will read anything anybody gives me. I won't necessarily agree with it, but I'll read it. So they would hand us these books of Mormon history, and that's literally what they were. We got introduced to Sandra Tanner at that point, because if you actually, no matter what you hear, in reality they are just Mormon historians, Sandra and Gerald. That's all they were, is Mormon historians. And so we started researching Mormonism at that time through these books about Mormon history. The more we read, the stranger it got. And it was just bizarre at times, of what Joseph Smith, how he lied about polygamy, how he practiced polygamy, how he married mothers and daughters, how he married women that were married already. It was just bizarre. And how he, had Governor Boggs of Illinois attempt an assassination on him. It was just a bizarre, you read the history what actually took place. There was some horrific stuff on both sides, but you read the history of what actually took place, and it was just strange. You read the history about how the Mormon temple ceremony came about. It was just weird again. So we read and we studied and we went to groups. We actually went to a polygamous group a couple of times, because that's what Joseph Smith Brigham Young taught. That's what the early Mormon church taught. We came to the conclusion that it was false and it couldn't be true. And at that point, I was angry with God. It makes no logical sense, but it makes emotional sense. I was angry with God because he had betrayed me. The Mormon God had betrayed me because it wasn't true. Like I said, it makes no logical sense, but because he's not God. The Mormon God is not God. So I was angry with God for about 5 years. I shook my fist at God. And it was just, it's strange, because logically, if there is no God, first of all, then why get mad at him? Because he's not, if he's not the right God, then he's not God, and it's the same thing. And so it was just so emotional for me, though, because I'd been betrayed so greatly. And so I know a lot of people I talk to have left the Mormon faith. They do feel betrayed, and a lot of them don't get over that. And just through the grace of God, we started to homeschool in California. We were in California at the time, and the only way to homeschool in California at the time was you have to be part of an umbrella program of a private school. And at that time, pretty much the only private schools in California were religious schools, Christian religious schools. And so that was our real first exposure to Christianity, was these Christian religious schools that we were homeschooling under. And so we had our first exposure ever to these Christians. And it was quite a shock in a lot of ways and quite comforting in other ways. I was able to ask questions and actually get answers. I may not agree with the answers, but I was able to get an answer, which in Mormonism, that was one of the things I gave my dad when we left Mormonism. I said, here's 6 questions. Give me an answer for them and I won't leave the Mormon church. And one of the questions had to do with polygamy. Why did he lie about it? Why was it such a big deal? Because the things that we were taught as Mormons was not true about polygamy. And then there's other questions about, like, I love my dad greatly, but he was a very bigoted man because he grew up in the South, where he grew up. And we had conversations when the Mormon changed allowing the blacks to have the Mormon priesthood. And he told me that if he had the ability at the time, he would have left the Mormon church. But he knew he would have lost his family. He knew he would have lost everything. And so he didn't. And so that one of my questions was, okay, if it's a change in doctrine, shouldn't it be put into the Mormon scriptures? Because in my lifetime, they've been amended. So if this is actually changing doctrine, then it should be in there. And so when my dad took these to the Mormon bishop and then took them to the stake president, their response was, well, he just doesn't have enough faith. He just needs to believe. And that's not an acceptable answer in my mind. And so when I went to these Christian churches, I was a jerk most of the time, as simple as it gets, because I would ask questions and demand answers. And then, like I said, the thing that drew me to Christianity was the ability to gain an answer. So, like I said, I may not understand the answer sometimes, or at least I would get one. And so, we moved from California to Texas, and I always say God's gracious to children and fools, and I wasn't a child at the time. So we didn't know anyone in Dallas. My future boss got us a hotel and an apartment rent for us in a place we didn't know anything about. We were driving down the freeway and we said, well, let's go to that church, knowing nothing about it. And we ended up in a church that had at least half the population of the church, and most of the ministers in the church were either professors or they were in school at Dallas Theological Seminary. And that was, once again, God's grace, because I was able to go in there. And if you had asked me at the time if I was a Christian or not, I would have said yes. And the reason was I did what Christians do. I went to church, I read the Bible, I did those things. And because that's what a Mormon is. You are a Mormon because you do what Mormons do. That's why you're a Mormon. You follow the prophet, you do this. And so if you had asked me at the time if I was a Christian, I would have said yes, but I wasn't. And so with that congregation, we were able to grow tremendously, and I was able to get questions answered. One of the men there introduced me to a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And it's a fairly thick book, it's a couple of inches. It has chapters on it. One of the chapters in it is the reliability of the Bible. How can I trust the Bible? And that to me was a big deal, because growing up as a Mormon, it's reliable as far as it's translated correctly, except nobody knows how it's translated correctly because nobody knows. And so I was able to go through that chapter, and that chapter laid out a couple of things. It starts with, can you trust the Bible to be historically accurate? And so it lays out whether you can trust it or not to be historically accurate. And it comes about that you can trust the Bible to be historically accurate. Now, it doesn't mean that everything in the Bible has been found yet. We don't have archaeological evidence for everything. I think it was about 15, 20 years ago, they found the first coin that talked about King David. That was King David's coin. Before that, they said King David didn't exist in reality, but they found a coin with King David's on it. So because we haven't found archaeological evidence, it doesn't prove it's wrong. All it means we haven't found it. Now, the ones that we have found, it has to 100% reliable. Because if it's not reliable historically, that means it's fiction. And if it's fiction, then it's just fiction. And so this is the section lays out, can you trust it to be historically accurate? And then it talks about, can you trust it to be prophetically accurate? Because in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are hundreds of prophecies. I think there's 700 and some odd prophecies just for the Messiah in the Old Testament. So we have evidence today that these prophecies were written thousands of years before Christ. The Dead Sea Scrolls is a great example. They're 1,000 years older than any other previous samples of the Old Testament that we have. And so we can say that these prophecies are in the Old Testament were thousands of years. Now, is it prophetically accurate? If it's not prophetically accurate, then what that means, again, it's fiction. It's not an accurate representation. But if it's prophetically accurate, then that means that it is supernatural, because you can't have prophecy without supernatural. It's outside of the norm for us. And then if you find that it's prophetically accurate, then is it applicable for your life and for what you do? And that was the hardest thing probably for me to come about with was, is it applicable for me? Does it apply to our lives? Does it talk to our lives? Is it meaningful to us? And so I started to read and study, and we actually ended up going to another Christian church, and for a variety of reasons. And in that new Christian church, they had a new Christians class. And at that point, up to this point, I could say Christ died for us. And it was us. It was the group. It was everyone in the world. It was me included, but it was us. And in this new Christians class, I realized that he died for me. And because of that, I was able to have a relationship with the real God and a relationship with him. And at that point, I got saved at that point. And then luckily for me, a few months later, my wife God was gracious enough that she was able to become saved as well through a different mechanism. But so we kind of got together at the same rough time and then started to grow. And that's why I'm a fairly voracious reader. And so it's so important that we read and we study and just know that through Christ, the real Christ, we're able to have a relationship with God and him. That's it, I think. I'm done.
Well, that's a little less than 2 hours.
I know. But I've been thinking about it.
Do you have children?
Yes, we have 3 kids, 3 boys, and
How old were they when you left?
thank the Lord, the oldest was 5.
Oh, nice.
And so they never had to get involved in this stuff. And we both have family on both sides that are still good Mormons, and they don't really understand. And they won't until God touches their hearts. But it's difficult, especially coming back to Utah.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
What brought you back to Utah?
We felt that we should come back for a long time, and her dad died and her mom was out here. And so we came back to take care of her mother, and she lived with us for about 3 years or so, and then has moved on with another kid. And so that's kind of where we're at. We wanted to come back because I think we have something to say. And so that's it.
How long ago did you come back?
About 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Somewhere in Dallas, were you?
We were in Rowlett, which is,
Oh,
most people don't know where that is, but that's east of Garland. Most people know where Garland is. Yeah.
And did you get baptized down there?
We did. We got baptized in the church that I was, what I got saved in. Yeah. It was a mega church in reality, but man, it's a really good program.
They got a lot of them down there.
They do, and this one's unique though. The reason this one was unique, I don't know what it is now, but it was unique because what they did is they said from the pulpit that this is not your church. And what they had is they had an agreement between the Sunday schools and the small groups. And the small groups would spawn a Sunday school, and that was the outreach into the church, and that became your church, was the small groups. But they spawned Sunday schools as outreaches to pull people into their small groups. And that was the agreement of being a small group at that church, was that you had to have a Sunday school. And you could have 2 or 3 small groups get together and host a Sunday school, or you could have one, however you wanted to handle it. But it was an eye-opening thing for me to see at that time. So,
Did you guys get your names removed?
yes, we did, and that was in Utah. And this was probably 30 some odd years ago. We had to threaten to sue them to actually get them to remove our names from it, because they wanted to hold a church court and they wanted to do all of these things, and we said no, we're not. We're just, we want to leave and be gone. And they finally did it.
And that took how long?
It probably took us 9 months to a year.
Wow.
Because my parents were involved, right? Because they wanted us to stay, and so they would put things in our way to try to stop us. And then they wanted to, the bishops would call us, the stake and they wanted to do all these, and we were like, no, just remove our names. And so eventually they did.
And you were in California at that point? Or?
We were in Utah still,
Oh, you were
and then
in
we moved to
Utah,
California
okay.
from Utah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you got to speak to the people that have been in your community and tell them why you were leaving?
Absolutely not.
Before I asked.
Well, because it was such an event of leaving that nobody wanted to talk about. Nobody wanted to confront you. Nobody wanted. Like I said, the issues that I brought forth, just 6. I brought 6 questions. I don't even remember them all. I know I had 6, and I gave them to my dad, and I said, "Look, just get an answer for these." And they wouldn't. And the reason is most of them they couldn't, and stay within their theological realm. And so if you can't answer a question, what do? You gotta have faith, you gotta have faith, you gotta have faith, right? And so there's so much bizarreness and strangeness and everything else in Mormon theology and in Mormonism that they just can't.
So you mentioned not the Mormon God, not the Mormon Jesus. What exactly, in a nutshell, would you say is the main difference from the God you believe in now and the God you used to believe in?
So as a Mormon, I grew up being told that the Jesus that was going to come to this earth was a spirit child of God the Father and one of his wives. They had a spirit baby. He came down. He was created. In other words, he was created. He came down. He served a purpose, a priesthood calling, actually. I was told that he served a priesthood calling. And when he served that priesthood calling, then he would go back after he died. And so he was a created being that served a purpose. And the God that I serve today has been God forever. He was not created. He, the Father, and the Spirit make the triune God. I never understood the Trinity. And I have, through a book called The Forgotten Trinity by James White, it's one of the best books that I've read on the Trinity. And the reason we believe the Trinity is because that's what the Bible teaches. It's as simple as it doesn't make logical human sense, but I would hope that a God who created all and created everything and is in control of everything and through his word supports everything, I can't comprehend. Because if I could comprehend a God, then that makes him a human because I could comprehend him. And so I cannot comprehend who God is because he is infinite, I'm not. And that's the big difference.
So who is the triune God then?
Father, Son, and Spirit.
Yeah, and how is that different from what Mormons believe in a Godhead?
Right, because at some point, they have the infinite regression problem, the Mormons do, which is at some, how did it all start? Well, what they say is that this God of this world had a baby, sent him down here, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit somehow failed and never got a body. I don't know how that happened, but somehow they failed. And so the triune God, once again, is uncreated. They're the creator of all things. Through Christ, everything was created. And they had a relationship, triune God, before creation. And because they are before creation, they're infinite and eternal, all-powerful, unlike the Mormon God who is hindered by his lineage, would be the easiest way to put it. He's hindered by it, and so it's a difference. I think I was talking earlier that even though we might call something the same thing, if the substance of that something is different, it cannot be the same thing, even though you name it the same thing. And that's the same with Jesus. You can call the Mormon Jesus, who was a created being, who filled a purpose. You can call him Jesus, but it's not the same thing as an infinite God who emptied himself to come to this earth to die on the cross for our sins because we can't do it. And then he reached out to us. And it just blows me away every time I think of it. He reaches out to us to bring us to him. And we don't deserve it. I can't do anything to earn my salvation because everything I do is corrupt. I can't work for it. I can't do anything to gain my salvation. And it just blows me away every time I think of it. That God would come to this earth, empty himself so that people can be in his presence, and yet go ahead and die for my sins because he loved me from eternity. He knew what was going to happen. He knows the evil that I am. He knows my heart and how evil my heart is. And yet he was willing to come to this earth and die on the cross for me. And I'm floored by it every time.
You didn't have that understanding as a Mormon?
No.
That Jesus died for you?
No, he died for us.
Jeff, you mentioned a few times that there were things as you studied Mormonism that were weird.
Yeah.
What was your encounter with the temple, obviously, right before you went on your mission?
It was really, so we went through before 92, which is when they took out the blood oaths. Okay, so when we went through, 90, right in the 90s, whatever it was, right in the early 90s. 90, okay, whenever it was, they took out the blood oaths. So we went before that. And so we had all of the blood oaths in there still. And it was shocking to go through and swear that you would never reveal any of these secrets or you allow yourself to be killed in a certain manner. And you do this and you do that. Yeah, and it's just this weird. And then you go back and read, like I said, we were reading history, and how he came about that stuff is he got kicked out of Freemasonry. And magically, he had these endowments appear, which were word for word the Freemason, plus he added some.
And they did kill people to save their soul.
They did, yep. And so that was one of the, it's just, and if you read the actual history, because you go back to the diaries, you go back to, all these things, you look at the Mountain Meadow Massacre, what happened with it. The only person to be executed for it was John D. Lee, right? He's Brigham Young's adopted son. His lawyer wrote an autobiography for John D. Lee while he was in prison waiting to be executed. And in that, John D. Lee lays the entire thing at Brigham Young's foot. I mean, just says he called it, he caused it. And so you read things.
Explain for some people that might not know.
It was when 170 some odd men, women, and children were slaughtered so that the Mormons in the area could get their cows, their horses, their goods. Because they were from Missouri, they deserved it.
Arkansas.
Arkansas, okay. There was some Missouri drivers, weren't there? There was,
There was two
Yeah.
groups
there
traveling.
was two groups.
And
Yeah, and
John
so,
Voight did a great.
yes, he did, the September Dawn. It is a horrific, horrible movie that's really good to watch. Because at the end of that movie, 100 and some odd men, women, children are slaughtered. And that's how the movie ends, right? And so, but it's a fairly accurate representation.
Yeah, everything Brigham Young said in that movie was direct quotes.
Yeah, and so it's like I said, but it's a horrific movie because at the end, all of these men, women, and children are being slaughtered, and
And the children were adopted.
and then anybody under 8 was adopted out, right? And then it took the federal government 3 or 4 years, 7 years, I can't remember the number of years to get the kids back to their families that actually were related.
Jeff, in encountering how the church painted their history, like they didn't really tell us about
No.
that in seminary, did they?
No, not at all. No.
But do you think the church is liable at all for fraud?
Okay. Sure. Sure, they're liable for fraud, but so are a lot of other religions, right? And because of our First Amendment that we have in the Constitution, that's enshrined in the Constitution, we have some protections for our religions, and it would be a difficult at best case, if impossible, to pursue something like that because it's the old buyer beware. I think it goes back to it with religion specifically. So, one thing that would destroy the Mormon Church, I believe, today, is if they published their financial records.
Yeah.
I believe it would just absolutely destroy the Mormon Church, and that's my challenge to them. If they really are, they think what they think they are, there's no reason that anybody can't walk in there and look at their records. You can come into my church that we go to, it's a little PCA church down here in the valley, Jordan Valley. You can come in and ask, can I come sit and look at your books? And they'll go, let's set up a time. And they'll open, even if they don't care if you're a member or not. You want to see them? Here we are. This is how much money we spend on this. This is how much money. Every dime is accounted for. And I believe honestly that if the Mormon Church was to, there's another victory for Satan. If the Mormon Church was to release their financials, I think it would destroy hundreds of thousands of people's testimonies of the Mormon faith.
How are your interactions with your still actively Mormon family, like family functions? Are they confrontational? Are they accepting? Non-existent?
Well, they vary from non-existent to they've left it alone now. They don't. We don't cover religion much because I won't back down because I know it's wrong. I know it's a false. I know they have false gods. I know we can go through the history. I can go through the history with them. I mean, all these things, and so it's just it's just best if it's at a surface level, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, that's the best we can do right now.
You mentioned your father-in-law was giving you these history books. So whatever became of his journey?
They got stuck on Joseph Smith,
What do you mean?
and they believe Joseph Smith was still a prophet,
Yeah.
and they believe the Book of Mormon, which that's the one. Well, that's one of the books that it's so easy to talk about the problems with the Book of Mormon is. I mean, and the Mormon Church and how they handle it. I don't know how many times it switched, even just a simple thing of theology switching back from they'll turn from to white and delights them to light and delights them to white and delights them to light and delights them, and it's just
So despite his knowledge of these problems, he was too enamored with Joseph Smith to give it up.
Yeah,
Basically, is what you're saying.
and I think it was too close. A lot of people it's their very existence.
Yeah.
And that's what's hard about leaving, especially in this valley or the Utah Valley. The hard part about leaving is it's not as bad today as it was. but you lose all of your social.
Yeah.
You lose all of your familiar connections. They're gone. And so overnight you're devastated, emotionally, socially, and it's such a hard thing. And I think for older people it is so difficult. Younger people too. But there's droves and droves leaving. I work with a bunch of younger men and women, and there are droves of leaving it because there's such a thing as the internet, and they don't have to get a hard copy book anymore. They can go out and look on the internet and find out that Joseph Smith was convicted in absenteeism for magic in New York State. They can go out and look on, the internet and see that he did marry. We don't know how many, but we know that he married at least this many because we have a record of a mother and a daughter. We have multiple records of women that were already married, getting married, having sex.
Currently married.
Yeah, having sex with Joseph Smith as being married. We have, and so they don't need these books because it's easy to go out and look. You can find somebody talking about it, like this is going to be on the internet.
But a lot of these people, even though they know these problems, still end up staying.
I've got an interesting conversation going on right now at work, and the guy says he knows for a fact the Mormon church is not true, but it's a good social thing for him and his family to be part of.
Yeah.
And that's how I was raised. If it wasn't the Mormon church, there's nothing.
Yeah.
And so to get over that fear of nothing a lot of times takes a long time. And that's one thing I'm grateful for God. He took about, depending on how you want to count, 10 to 12 years to bring me to him after we left Mormonism. It's not a short-term process for most people. There are some that overnight can handle it, but for most it is not a short-term process. It is a long-term, and it is difficult.
Anything else?
I think it's interesting that when I questioned the Mormon church, I was never LDS, but I was always told, the things you're talking about are the people, not the religion. And the thing that brought me to Christianity was the people, not the religion, And so it's funny how it flip-flopped,
Right.
How they were just accepting at first, and it didn't matter to them, what my background was, or, where I found the opposite with the LDS church.
And that's what we found too. That's one of the things that we found was unique in California when we were first homeschooling in these Christian groups. It was the very same thing. Tamara felt accepted right off the bat. She felt loved. And then she saw how these women loved their husbands, which was a shock. And it's not that she didn't love me, it's just because it's different.
Well, they
Because-
sure don't love you when you start to leave the church.
It's-
They don't show Christian love to you then.
It is, yes, it is.
Especially back then.
Yeah, it is definitely true. And so it's a difficult.
We were away for 25 years and came back and I was trying to rebuild relationships, and it's hard. But in some ways it's easier because we have kind of that break and they don't expect as much Mormon from us now.
Because we've been away for so long, and
Yeah.
it's not like,
So we're rebuilding, but on different terms.
yeah.
But for a long time, we didn't have contact with hardly any family.
All right. Is that it? Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. Would you close with some prayer?
Sure. Dear Father God, thank you so much just for your Son and just for sending him to be your mediator, Lord. Don't understand it. Just grateful for it, Lord. We just ask your hand be upon those who watch this video, that you will be glorified and that your will be done. Thank you for all that you do and all that you will do for us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Okay.